Bigelow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gray, you've taken on a tremendous undertaking here with this bill. You've picked up where other authors have left off, and you're trying to make something happen here. And you've moved the ball farther than anyone else so far. So to that, congratulations. I think that your work and diligence and having the opportunity to sit with you as your co-chair, vice chair of the committee hearings that we've had is great. You've been able to work with the different stakeholders. I think being the vice chair of the Approps has put me in a position of hearing it from two different perspectives, one from a policy side, one from a fiscal side. And after hearing all of that, I think you're going down the right pathways, but there's some details that are going to just need those I's dotted and those T's crossed. And I thank you for listening to the chair of the Appropriations Committee to take the extra time to study this and work on it. I know we were prepared to take an action today, and we came willing to make that happen. But with this, I think at the end of the day, we're all going to come out in a better place with a bill that can be supported by all parties. And I just want to compliment you on your efforts. I also want to compliment the people in the audience who are on both sides of this issue. There's a lot of delicate matters that everyone takes very sincere, and they're very passionate about. And I want to thank them for their professionalism and for their wisdom in trying to work through these details. And I hope that in the next few days, when's our next hearing?
The 29th is set for the 29th.
This is set for the 29th to be, for this to be heard.
Regular hearing is set for the 29th. If somehow we can come to an agreement by the 22nd, we might set an additional hearing.
Okay, so that's cleared and aired for everyone to understand. Work will begin immediately following this hearing, and people will work on those details. And if it can get done by the 22nd, that would be great. And I just hope that everyone that does bring that information to members to consider, they do it in a professional manner and a manner where we can easily understand it, because this has been a very complicated matter. I know, talking with members on both sides of the aisle who have asked questions, most realize that the weeds are pretty deep and pretty difficult to navigate. This is a very challenging issue for us. But with your leadership, with the chairman of the Appropriations leadership, I'm sure we'll come to a conclusion, and this will all be resolved in a fashion that we'll all be proud of. So thank you for that.
If you'd like to comment, if not, we have a couple.
I'll keep it relatively short. I just wanted to follow up on the Vice Chair's comments. I know this issue is complicated and new to this committee, or at least to some of the members of the committee who don't sit on GO, and it's relatively simple. There are two issues: horse racing in, horse racing out. Suitability language in, suitability language out. 2 years ago, we had a coalition that wanted suitability language and horse racing out. They've gotten what they wanted, and we have a bill before you that contains those provisions today. And as the chair knows, I would be happy to take those two fiscal amendments and move forward today, but we have some further revisions we can do to improve that suitability language to make folks more comfortable. But those are the two issues, and it is not as complicated as perhaps some people might like to make it in conversation.
I would suggest there's the third, and that's the state of California and the fiscal impact it has on our state. And so, of course, you denied my efforts to have a 25% tax rate on this, so we are you think that's a joke.
Fair enough.
But we do have that third component that we've been working on, and I think the amendments shoot to address. We have some more people who have some comments or questions. Mr. Quirk.
I just want to echo the statements of the chair and the vice chair. Thank you very much for your hard work. I have a lot of catching up to do on this, and I hope that we can reach agreement next week or the week after.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Rinaldi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to, Mr. Gray, raise a flaw in the bill that I hope we can easily agree on. I was reading through the bill and noticed the bill says, a person shall not offer to any player located within California any game provided on the internet that is not authorized by the state pursuant to this chapter. So I'm assuming that through this legislation you are not seeking to prevent my wife from playing Candy Crush on her iPhone.
Well, certainly willing to consider that amendment, Mr. Overnolte, if that would improve the situation at home. But nonetheless, no, that is certainly not my intent, and would be happy to work with you. I know this is an area you have some expertise in, to make sure we're not grabbing anything outside of the intent of the bill, which is to focus on internet poker. And members, there is language in the bill that specifically limits this to internet poker because other states have authorized additional online gaming that we are not seeking to do so in this bill. But thank you, sir.
Well, although I admit that the idea of breaking my wife of her Candy Crush addiction does have some merit, I'd suggest that you might want to reword that and say poker game instead of just blanket game on the internet. And there are a couple of other places in the bill that I think would require the same treatment. So if you would take a look at that, the bill moves forward, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely will do. Thank you.
Mr. Holden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take a moment and thank the author as well. I know that we've had an opportunity to talk here in recent times, and I would acknowledge your thoughtful tenacity behind this issue, and also the Chair of Appropriations. I think that the two of you have shown a tremendous commitment not only to how this issue should be addressed and can be addressed, and I do believe that the kinds of issues you're trying to address, regulation, I think is very much an important threshold that you've crossed, and I agree that is a need for the bill, creates the need for the bill. The Chair has talked about lost revenue to the state. I think that those are two important pillars that are markers of why we are here talking about it today. And I trust that you're also setting I think, and I just wanted to acknowledge this, that the two of you are sort of setting a new theme, I think, an important one, on how it is important to, if you can, go that extra mile and try to bring a consensus where there is an opportunity to achieve that. And I do see it. I do believe it is possible. And I do appreciate that you're trying to do it here in a committee as opposed to on the floor. I think that's another important indicator that others should recognize what you're trying to do as well. So those on both sides of the issue need to appreciate the fact that you've hung in there on this, but that you're also trying to do it in a smart and thoughtful way. So I just wanted to acknowledge not only your commitment to this, but also Chair Gonzalez as well.
Ms. Bonilla.
I just had a couple questions. I was curious about the $57 million for the horse racing, and how did that number come about? What's it based upon?
There are current percentages in how the state deals with the horse racing industry. We have some history of various subsidies from the state, and we used what's previously done in California to establish that number, and obviously based on need. I mean, components of that $57 million go to specific purposes. Some of it to pensions for workers at tracks, some of it track fees, purses, et cetera. And for those of you who aren't familiar with purses, the rewards for winning races that in fact encourage and strengthen the horse racing industry here in California. As has been seen recently, we have a pretty incredible horse racing story to tell in the last few years and some significant national victories. But putting some of those dollars into those specific purposes at those amounts help support those needs.
And is that an ongoing allocation?
That's an ongoing allocation.
Forever?
And to the Chair's point, in the initial years of internet poker, we're not sure. The estimates on the total market is anywhere from $350 million to $1.4 billion. Obviously, if it's at $1.4 billion, there's going to be quite a bit of money here, quite a bit of money into the general fund, as well as the $60 million into the horse racing, and of course, of that, the money into the fairs. But But up until then, there may be, it could be $50 million the first year, and then I think that gets at the core of the chair's amendment that 90% of that money would go to the purposes laid out in the revenue stream sharing agreement in the bill. But then some money would go to the general fund, 10%, I believe, as indicated in the analysis. That's all irrelevant once you hit a certain dollar threshold, and the states bring in, obviously, in excess of that $60 million.
The other question I had was on the ramped up taxes. How did you arrive at that in your bill? The 8.8% if the gaming revenue is less than $150 million, and the 15% if it's 350.
In some of our earlier discussions, we were actually at 15%, which is what's been done in some of the other states. And members, some of the other states, obviously Nevada, New Jersey, these are activities that have been authorized. But Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania are all looking currently, as we are, at authorizing this. And so we looked at rates both in the current markets, around 15. We listened to input from stakeholders. Some folks would like to see, I know this is going to surprise the committee, but some people would like to pay less taxes and are as low as 5%. We tried to strike a balance. Vice Chairman Bigelow and I had many, many meetings. We had discussions, and we ended up with a graduated rate starting at 8 and was it 8 3/4? Yeah, which is equivalent to the corporate tax rate, and then moving up to 15 when the market's at kind of full strength. We thought that was a good compromise. Certainly willing to take other input. Thought 5 was a little low. Thought 25 was a little high.
And is there any variation? Is this just statewide, or because we've been talking a little bit about leveling the playing field? Is there any variation of the tax according to the market share of the business?
Not to the market share, the size of the market. So if the total market's at 250, 350, 450, you have different rates. And the highest rate is the 15, which I think we've settled, at least in the current bill, at 350 and above would hit the 15%.
I just asked that, and I'm not on GEO, so I'm sorry I wasn't part of all these discussions. But maybe if we're talking about this being ramped up, maybe one of the solutions is ramping up the tax rate for those who are new to the market versus those who feel they have a big share of the market already. That just might,
I think, though, the market share, we're talking about the service provider, the people who operate it, they're all starting from the same position. We're talking about, who they're contracting with, and the people paying the taxes would be the tribes or card clubs. So it's not apple. It is apples and oranges a little bit, but I appreciate what you're trying to get at, and I think overall on the competitiveness, that's something that we're going to continue to talk about to ensure a healthy market for all participants, and that it's not overly one-sided.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mr. Garcia.
Mr. Chair, GO, question is regarding suitability, and the one point that continues to come up is whether or not there's a group or a company included or excluded from the possibility of working with the state of California in this industry. Have we received any legal opinion on the merit of including or excluding an individual organization to try to help us kind of guide the shaping of a language that could either, one, have legal standing, or two, have no merit, and we're really having a discussion or debate on a matter that will not stand up in court. So do you have anything along those lines to be able to reinforce the conversation that's taking place?
Certainly there are legal opinions available that have been done and have been shared with folks. We have not asked our counsel here to issue an opinion on that subject. Certainly would be open to that discussion.
I think in response to that, we cannot write a bill that singles out a single company. our legislative council won't engage in writing that bill. So there's that aspect as well. So it's the activity, and we want to address activity. And to be honest, it's not just one actor. There are multiple folks who have engaged. I mean, you can start saying before 2006, between 2006 and 2011, from this point, previously in different states. So it's very complex, but we cannot, for example, have the exclusion of one company in this bill.
Well, I think, Madam Chair, it's those points, the different dates, we need to determine, we need to make a public policy decision as a body at what and where we draw the line on an illegal market. There's broad disagreement on that. But, we are in fact debating that issue. And I think that's at the very heart of, as long as we decide on a point in time. Now, 2011 forward, it's very clear that states have the ability to authorize, but absent the states authorizing the activity, it would be illegal. And so anyone who's engaged in that, for example, today in California legally, that's clearly illegal. At different points before that, there's differences of opinion, and so we need to debate that and decide as a body what point in time we want to establish in this bill, because it's a bit of a gray area.
With that, if there's no more questions, Mr. McCarty, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, a fiscal question.
Yeah.
I actually have quite a few questions, but I'm new to this area. I wasn't on GEO, and as an alternate here, just a few hours trying to get up to speed, but looks like we'll have a few weeks to learn more. But first, I just think that I appreciate this going forward. I think the big picture is we wanted to try to get this industry regulated and taxed to have California a piece of the pie. And I do appreciate the chair's suggestion that we should have a guarantee of a piece for the general fund as we start in the initial years dealing with the horse racing, making sure that they remain whole. I do have this question as far as the startup cost, the $12.5 million. I understand that there's a proposal which I think is fair, that would have some of that potentially offset by taxes, half of that, my understanding. But in the analysis, it talks about how the Department of Justice, their costs could be up to $70 million, and this is, I guess, separate from the gaming body, the Gaming Control Commission, Gambling Control Commission. So how does that pencil out? If we're $12 million up front to start it, and the DOJ saying up to 70, can you explain how that works?
Up to 70.
Yeah, in the analysis, I guess here, it says that DOJ costs are unknown, but these startup costs could be up to $70 million in 2017, 2018.
So the cost for the DOJ to...
Yeah. So how does that work when we're putting $12 million up front, or maybe?
Well, we're $12.5 million per licensee would be paid in. Mm-hmm. So depending on how many we get, and then of course there are special funds for enforcement over the DOJ that actually, just in this budget that I think we're going to debate later today, we're using some of the surplus that sits in some of the special funds to increase the enforcement.
So each licensee pays the
12.5.
12.5. So
I think it's 12.
And then the DOJ has an additional application fee that they can leverage in order to ensure that their activities are being paid for.
So you'll be guaranteed to get enough for the 12.5 and their licensee fees to get to the $70 million that they're looking for?
Yeah, the enforcement piece will absolutely be taken care of under the provisions of the bill.
Okay.
There's no question or debate on that whatsoever.
Okay.
Yes, the cost to the DOJ is unknown, but they will be able to recoup their costs through the application fee. That was just an estimate. That was their estimate. Well, yes, that was the best estimate we could come forward. If there are any other questions, if not, Mr. Gray, I think we've gone through this, but if there's something you'd like to end with, and see you next week, see you in 2 weeks. I'm sure I'll see you before that.
I'll see you after the committee.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, first of all, members, thank you for the dialogue. This is a big and complicated issue that we've boiled down. I called the two remaining issues simple, and I was referring to those issues. Chairwoman Gonzalez brought up the state's portion in the revenue, and I think we're all in agreement that we want to maximize that. That's not an issue of contention whatsoever. We're really down to the suitability provisions and what we deem as bad actors, what we deem as periods of time folks should or should not have been operating in California, and how we deal with that. Nevada dealt with it in a certain way, unique with the bad actor provisions. Many of the other states that I mentioned, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, don't have provisions dealing with bad actor or suitability. So there's a cross-section of ideas being debated throughout the other states. We have a well-thought-out, thorough bill here that's been worked on for a couple years. I'd like to put the finishing touches on this suitability language, working with the chair and those of you on this committee over the next week or two, and then move forward. Because at the end of this, what too often, as I said in my opening, gets lost is that this is an activity that goes on every day, that consumers in California partake in, and oftentimes probably misled into believing is a legal activity or is a legal U.S. site when it is not. And that opens itself up for fraud, identity theft, and other activities, certainly minors and other folks engaging in it. So it is absolutely in our interest. I brought a bill earlier this session on fantasy sports with a similar approach to regulating and ensuring that some of these online activities, and the online world's a new world. I mean, it's funny, we debate kind of the back taxes and the unfair competitive advantage. I would remind everyone, it wasn't too many years ago, we had a similar debate in respect to Amazon and their activities in California versus brick and mortar stores. So these are not necessarily new debates. They are new perhaps to the gaming world, but the gaming world, like the rest of the economy, is moving in new directions, and the online world is a reality that we all deal with in our everyday lives, and it's important that we get our arms around this, craft defensible, good public policy that takes California's interests into mind first and foremost, and protects consumers and provides revenue and a safe and regulated game for those that enjoy internet poker, who can go out and do that, enjoy that activity in their leisure time. So thank you for the dialogue, the consideration. I look forward to working together over the next couple weeks, get a finished product, and head to the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. We appreciate it. The chairman had to step away. She has to present. So thank you very much for your presentation today. We'll move on to our last remaining item, which is the consent calendar. We have SB 815. It has been moved by Mr. Wagner, seconded by Mr. Calderon, and it is out on an A roll call. So thank you, members. Appreciate everyone being here. We stand adjourned.